Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Chess Down Under. Today we are taking a look at a really crazy blitz game that Nihal Sarin, the Indian chess prodigy, has played on chess.com. Absolutely fascinating game. Let's get into it. So Nihal has the black pieces. His opponent starts e4, c5, we're going into the Sicilian Defense, knight f3, and e6, so potentially heading towards a Khan or a Timon of Sicilian, or so it seems. d4, so we have an open Sicilian with the exchange of pawns in the middle of the board. Knight to f6, and now I know a lot of beginner players would be tempted to push that pawn forward and harass the knight, but you can't do that because if you push that pawn forward, the queen comes out, checks the king, and picks up that pawn for free. So it's a very common trap that beginners fall into all the time. Instead, knight to c3, and now the typical Taimanov or Khan Sicilian type moves here would be potentially playing a6, queen to c7, or knight to c6. But in this position here, Sarin plays a setup that I've never seen before, and I've played the Sicilian for my whole life. I've never seen this approach. He plays bishop to b4, kind of going into like a Nimzo Indian style, but we've exchanged the c-pawn already. So are we in a Sicilian? Are we in a Nimzo? What are we doing here? I've never seen this approach actually. Now he pushes e5, obviously because the queen coming out to a5 is not a check now, so we can't pick up that pawn. So you can harass the knight. The knight jumps forward. Now look at all the pressure here that's piling up on this knight on c3. Now, instead of just defending that knight with a move like bishop to d2, what is going on here? We can potentially win a pawn here, but in exchange, the queen will be infiltrating here. So I think a lot of people in this situation would probably just castle their king, right? But in this position, if you were to castle as black, you're walking into bishop to h6. So let me just show that here. Bishop to h6. And now white is threatening checkmate here. So the only way to avoid that is to play g6, and then you just lose your rook. So you can't castle here as black. So Nihal just plays king to f8. And obviously bishop to h6 now is not a threat because we can simply take that piece as the pawn isn't pinned. What a crazy position here. We're only 7 moves in and I haven't seen this approach. Bishop to d2, guarding the knight here, and pawn to h5, kicking that queen out. That queen obviously is very annoying here, staring at black's king position, so let's boot her out of there. The queen moves to a nice central square on e4, and now Nihal Sarin just gives up his bishop for the knight on c3. And white retakes with the pawn. What is happening here? He's deliberately damaged his pawn structure after Nihal just unprovoked gave up his dark square bishop. Really unique type of play here, playing for a very imbalanced position. Knight to c6, developing the knight, and bishop to d3 with a very menacing looking battery here. The white pieces eyeing this h7 square, but we've got to remember that black has played king f8 already, so is this battery actually going to amount to anything? Because black is never castling. Nihal Sarin plays d6. This is something you need to be aware of. In these positions here, you find this a lot in d4 openings as well, with an advanced pawn on e5. Whenever white has an advanced pawn like this on e5, it's a really annoying wedge, and it can create a lot of very interesting attacking games. It can be the support of a potential kingside pawn storm, or it can just really cripple the black army in terms of how it moves around on the board. It's a very annoying situation as black, so we strike at it immediately and try to eliminate that pawn. White takes, and Nihal recaptures with his queen, so developing the queen at the same time. We have castles kingside, getting the king into safety and connecting the rooks together. White's army is very close to being fully mobilized at this stage, and have a look at black. What is he going to do with his light squared bishop? How is he going to get his rooks into the game because his king can't castle? What is happening here? This looks really terrifying for white actually. He very modestly just develops his bishop to d7, rook to b1, hitting the pawn here on b7, danger, danger. He pushes it forward to b6, knight to b5, hitting the queen. Where does Nihal go with his queen? Back to e7, rook to e1. Now, pressure here along the e file, rook to c8. We are now tickling this isolated pawn here with our pieces, and white pushes it forward, striking the knight. It jumps back to f6, striking the white queen. The queen retreats back to f3, lining herself up against the black king. The black king steps off that line. Whenever your opponent has their queen or their rook lined up in front of your king, it always presents itself with interesting tactical opportunities. So when given a chance, it's generally a good idea to step aside from having your king eyed off like that by one of the heavy pieces. And now white plays h3. He's looking to just launch his pawns up the board and completely destroy black's king shelter. So Nihal plays h4 himself, and now his idea is that if white tries to play g4, he's going to take en passant and open up the h-file himself for his rook. So he's looking to activate his own rook down the h-file. Very interesting play here from Nihal. We have bishop to g5 now, so what an incredibly annoying pin now. This knight can't be defended by any other piece other than the queen, and now white can potentially just damage the structure here. What does black do? He very casually just relocates his rook, just allowing that destruction of his kingside to occur. But white isn't interested in cashing in immediately. No, he wants to bring his knight into e4 and pile up the pressure. White doesn't just want to damage black's pawn structure. He wants to completely destroy the position here. What does black have in exchange for this? What can black do? He simply drops his queen back. Can this possibly work for Nihal? We have knight e4 now, threatening to absolutely demolish the situation here on the black king side. He takes on e4, leaving his rook here hanging, giving up the exchange. But it's important to note here that if white were to take that rook immediately, black has this interesting in-between move, hitting the queen and the rook on b8. So while in this position, black is offering the exchange, he can potentially get a rook back in return as well. So very interesting tactical play here from Sarin. That is why in this position here, white did not take the rook. He instead took the knight, and now he's threatening this knight here. Look at that, we've got two attackers on c6, and the rook is under attack as well. But he simply slides the rook across to c8, protecting the rook and defending the knight at the same time. Great multi-purpose move. Rook to d1, hitting the loose bishop on d7, which needs to be guarded. Nihal guards it with knight e5, defending d7 and attacking the queen on f3 as well. What an interesting move. The queen drops back to e2, now with x-ray pressure against that knight, which means that this bishop might suddenly move out of the way, and suddenly that knight would find itself embarrassed there on that position. Bishop to c6, and Nihal's idea is that after the exchange, yes, his knight is hanging there, but he recaptures the bishop with the knight. And now have a look at this position here. White is gloriously developed with all of his pieces. Black's situation looks abysmal. His rook here, how is it going to get into the game? And have a look at the kingside situation here. What is happening? Can black possibly turn this game around? And white might even be able to land a rook on the 7th rank here. And he does. This is absolutely looking terminal here for black. Can he save this game somehow? He activates his queen to c5, hitting the loose bishop on g5. White defends it, brings it back to f4. Queen to f5, hitting that bishop again. Every single move, Nihal Sarin is attacking something. White doesn't have a single moment to rest here. Every single move, he's attacking something. The bishop goes back to e3. And now, knight to e5. The knight is now hitting the rook, and it's hitting this pawn on c4 as well. Double attack. White takes the loose pawn on h7, and we take on c4, and we're hitting the bishop on e3 as well. And this bishop has just been getting constantly harassed the whole game. The past few moves from the queen, and now the knight. This bishop is not getting any rest at all this game. It relocates itself to d4, and now the rook finally activates itself. It's looking to swing across to g6 and line itself up against the white king. That sad looking rook. When black played king to f8, it looked like it would be really difficult for that rook to get into the game, but now it's suddenly going to become an absolute powerhouse. c3 now, making sure that that bishop on d4 is nicely anchored in the center of the board there. And rook to g6, danger, danger. Remember what we said before, whenever there's a heavy piece lined up against the king, it creates tactical opportunities in the game. This is a funny moment now. The king moves across to f1, so previously it was being eyed by the rook, and now it's being eyed by the queen. So yes, you stepped out of the direction of the rook, but well, was it that much of an improvement because you're still getting eyed off by the queen here? The queen shuffles across to d5, and have a look at this. Checkmate threat, danger, danger. White needs to guard that somehow. He plays f3, and now in this position here, the game is basically busted for white. Can you see the winning shot here? That's right, Nihal plays e5, pushing the bishop out of the way, and his idea is that if white were to take the pawn, it looks like he's got enough pressure to take that pawn. Well, we don't simply take the bishop, no, we pin the bishop against the queen, and now that piece will be lost. You can't just simply defend that bishop because, have a look at this, this is an absolutely incredible sequence. We now play knight to e3 check, and the point is the queen can't take the knight because remember that loose point here, if that queen takes that knight, our queen is just coming in with checkmate. So the only move here is to bring the king up the board, and now we slide in with our rook and we're picking up the queen. What an incredible tactical sequence here in the event that white were to take that pawn on e5. White sees that he can't take the pawn, so he tries dropping his bishop all the way back to f2. Looks like it's guarding the king nicely there, but it doesn't. Have a look at this now. Knight to d2 check. The king has to move, and once again, now remember this, the king is lined up against the rook, so what does Nihal play? Knight to f3 check, and we can't take the knight this way because that pawn is pinned by the rook, and you can't take it with the queen because then we will just take the queen ourselves, and you can't recapture once again because of the pin. So that knight can't be taken, which means we are forking the king and the rook. So black is completely winning here. And in this position, Nihal's opponent resigned. What an absolutely incredible, crazy game here in a very unusual Sicilian defense where black didn't castle, he just shuffled his king across. What an incredible tactical game here. Alright, well I hope everyone enjoyed today's video and thank you for watching.